You've heard the phrase, art reflects the artist, right? But what does that actually mean? If you've seen Spirited Away or Ponyo, then you know about Japan's most famous animator, Hayao Miyazaki. To explore the relation between art and artist, let's examine his third Ghibli film, My Neighbor Totoro. Now, to rewind a bit, his first Ghibli film was Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, 1984. Based off his own manga, it's a film with world building on par with dystopian adventures like Blade Runner or Hunger Games. However, Nausicaa differs in many areas from these films, containing themes of anti-nuclear sentiment and motherly feminism. The anti-war themes in this film germinate into a battle for a god weapon capable of wiping out hordes of monstrous insects called Ohm, and to fight back the toxic jungle which threatens all humans. It's a race for this weapon that Nausicaa, the film's heroine, seeks to stop to prevent any further human conflict. Miyazaki's second film, Castle in the Sky, echoes the anti-war, anti-nuclear perspective, featuring an opportunistic military matched against a young girl with magical powers and a young boy. All these characters chase the titular Castle in the Sky, a flying city rumored to hold the knowledge of an ancient civilization long dead. And then third, Totoro. Spoilers, nothing happens. A girl gets lost and found. What changed? Why two epic fantasy stories, and then this uncharacteristic film that's practically a drama? The answer lies in Miyazaki's idea of what fantasy stories can do. They, fantasy stories, tell you to face reality. But at least for me, the power of fantasy was that it gave me a space to be a hero in. Even if it's not animation or manga, it can be old stories or legends. This is what humanity has developed to help us get by. It's pretty clear to see the human need for stories like this. Some of the most popular movies ever are fantasy stories. But what kind of a fantasy is Totoro? Because what so many people say after watching is, oh wow, it's boring. We think of fantasy stories as movies complete with set pieces of grand scale and brave heroes. And in the opposite corner is Totoro, which doesn't have a single weapon in it. It fights its fantasy battles with umbrellas and vegetables.
Ooh, that's good.
An examination of Miyazaki's own childhood sheds a lot of light on how the story of Totoro isn't really that far from his own early existence. In fact, the plot of Totoro is his childhood. In his younger years, his mother was confined to bed while battling tuberculosis. His family moved to the country during World War II to escape the bombings, and without his mother in the house, Miyazaki would wake up early to cook food for his family. Now, if you take a look through Miyazaki's library, you rarely see a film that hits this close to home. Here are the two main characters, Satsuki and Mei, as they arrive at their new home. It may look like any joyful moment, but let's look deeper at their reaction. The girls are cheerful, yes, but don't they seem a bit overly cheery?
It's collapsing! It's collapsing!
Japanese critic Shinichi Tanaka suggests that their almost excessive high spirits could be kind of defense mechanism for dealing with the trauma of the move, and he even describes the girls' behavior as, quote, temporarily expelling their sense of loss. There is more happening internally with the girls than their smiles suggest, which is foreshadowed by these little guys. They skitter around in the corners of the house, the same way anxious thoughts do inside your brain. It's an analogy for the glimpses of fear that are hiding in the nooks and crannies of the girls' thoughts. Now, let's take ourselves a break to do a little thought experiment. Close your eyes, keep them closed. If you open your eyes, you'll get distracted. What is it that makes childhood so wonderfully joyful? Maybe it's the lack of responsibilities, but I would say that it's the hot chocolate your mom makes when you come back inside from a snow day. You can open your eyes now. Satsuki, the older sister, has a lot of pressure on her. With her mother out of commission and her father needing to work, Satsuki has to take on the brunt of responsibility.
I overslept again.
I had to take a lunch to school today.
Oh no, I forgot all about that.
That's okay. I'm making lunch for everyone. Hey, it's Barney! I'm coming, just a minute!
In Hayao Miyazaki, exploring the early work of Japan's greatest animator, author Raz Greenberg explores Satsuki's role as a young adult. Satsuki, in particular, is something of a tragic figure in the film. Old enough to realize the possible implications of her mother's illness, and forced to grow up too fast due to this realization. In the course of the film, Satsuki takes upon herself her absent mother's responsibilities of housework and cooking, and also the more metaphysical adult responsibilities of space and time.
And her doctor said that she should be able to come home real soon.
So she'll be home tomorrow? There she goes again with tomorrow.
Well, I think tomorrow might be a bit soon.
Satsuki has a metaphorical death of her childhood. It's more difficult for her to have the whimsical, carefree attitude Mei has with all her responsibilities. But she is still unprepared physically and emotionally to care for Mei and act in the same way an adult would. What does this say about Miyazaki? Longtime Ghibli producer Toshio Suzuki spoke of an interaction they had while creating Totoro, recalling an angry discussion with Miyazaki in which Suzuki insisted that such a good kid as Satsuki couldn't exist. Miyazaki retorted, "She did exist. That was me." Where Satsuki exists in limbo between adult and child, Mei is unapologetically a child. She is designed in a more exaggerated style, with a large mouth, pigtails, and chubby little limbs. Satsuki is designed to look older, with her face drawn as a younger version of her mother's. Because of this maturity difference and a lack of a mother figure, Mei attaches herself to Satsuki, adopting her as a surrogate mother figure since Mama Bear is out of commission. This backfires in the third act when Satsuki proves unable to be the mother she needs, forcing Mei into a panic state in an attempt to find some emotional stability. Enter Totoro. Totoro acts as a kind of double parent, having motherly and fatherly qualities. Totoro is something you can nuzzle against, like a mother with a stomach that is reminiscent of a womb. It is also cheerful, bouncy, and fun, like the traits the father has. Totoro gives the psychological shelter that the girls are in such desperate need of. It provides a sense of peace, even in the darkest times of the film. It is a parental super soldier. In fact, Totoro is almost too perfect. When Mei first encounters Totoro, it is after Satsuki starts school and father is engrossed in his work. The loneliness begins to set in, but in the current moment, she is content with amusing herself. This is when she discovers the magical Totoro inside the camphor tree. After her meeting, she falls asleep and is woken up by Satsuki and father to find Totoro nowhere to be seen. Later on, the children see Totoro growing seedlings at night, and they join the ritual. When they wake up, the tree they grew last night vanished. Instead, tiny seedlings had sprouted. Does this mean that Totoro isn't real? Totoro's traits of strange appearances, parental ability, and magic imply to me that Totoro is a forest spirit, a benevolent creature who can appear and disappear at will. But Totoro could be the product of Mei and Satsuki's imagination. Critic Hikaru Hoso argues that Miyazaki was attempting to reclaim his childhood by creating an image of an idealized family that interacts with the world in a positive fashion. A microcosmic utopia in which home, society, the natural, and the supernatural combine in an enchanted realm where problems are overcome through kindness, mutual respect, and appreciation. Does this mean that Miyazaki was trying to create a childhood for himself? Potentially. This is a movie that you could argue is therapy for him, a sort of longing for an idyllic past, or maybe a revisionist childhood, depending on your perspective. Miyazaki's mother passed away from her sickness when he was 10, leaving him to try and fill the emotional pit in himself. And now, it's time for global restorative nostalgia. This is a term coined by Svetlana Boym, and it means, at first glance, a longing for a place, but actually a yearning for a different time, the time of our childhood. The nostalgic person desires to obliterate history and turn it into private or collective mythology. Let's focus on the obliterate and mythology parts of that definition. By obliterate, I think Boym means the idea of wiping away the true events of the past and replacing them with something different, mythology. She argues that the nostalgic person wants to forget their past and craft instead a fictitious version to create a pseudo-fantasy. Is that what Miyazaki is looking to do? Not quite. It is true that Miyazaki is going back into his childhood and creating a mythology from that. But he uses the mythology to combat his personal history of trauma instead of trying to change it. He embraces his history and gives it meaning with mythology. This is what Miyazaki's personal fantasy looks like. He's created stories of epic scale and conflict, but My Neighbor Totoro is a much more realistic, accessible version that we can be the heroes of, whether it's being inspired to look at the world more joyfully, or setting a better example for the ones after us. My Neighbor Totoro is a fantasy that we can live.
Dad, is it lunchtime yet?
What? We just ate breakfast.